It started on what should have been just another rainy Tuesday in Portland. I was curled up in my favorite reading nook in our Pearl District townhouse, the one with the bay window overlooking the street below, where I could watch people hurrying past with their umbrellas while staying cozy inside. The sound of rain tapping against the glass usually calmed me, but that evening, it felt more like an ominous drumbeat as I stared at my laptop screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Don't forget to hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up to support more stories like this. Now, let me share what happened. I'm Jennifer Martinez, and until that moment, I thought I had a pretty good handle on my life. At 32, I had a successful career as a graphic designer, a beautiful home, and what I believed was a solid marriage to Daniel Thompson, a charming real estate agent I'd met at a friend's wedding 4 years ago. But as I scrolled through my credit card statement for the third time, my perfectly curated world began to crumble. The first charge that caught my eye was from the Ritz-Carlton in Maui, $4,182.50. I blinked hard, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me after a long day at the agency. But no, the numbers stayed the same. Below that were charges from high-end boutiques in Wailea, expensive restaurants, and a sunset sailing cruise. The thing is, I hadn't been to Hawaii in years, and I certainly hadn't spent nearly $15,000 there in the past week. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, my rose gold wedding band catching the soft light from my desk lamp. I should call Dan immediately, right? There had to be a reasonable explanation. But something stopped me, a nagging feeling in my gut that I couldn't shake. Instead, I opened Instagram, something I rarely checked these days since I'd been so busy with work. And there it was, posted just 3 hours ago, a photo of a sunset over turquoise waters. The caption read, "Paradise found living my best life." The perfectly manicured hand holding a Mai Tai belonged to Rebecca Anderson, Dan's ex-wife. My throat went dry. Rebecca's Instagram stories showed more. Designer shopping bags from the same stores on my credit card statement. The exact same. Restaurants. The same hotel. My mind raced back to last week when Dan said he had to fly to Los Angeles for an urgent real estate conference. He'd been so apologetic about the last-minute trip, promising to make it up to me. I'd even packed his suitcase, noting how light it seemed for a 5-day conference. I felt like I was going to be sick. The walls of our tastefully decorated townhouse, with its carefully chosen artwork and color-coordinated throw pillows, suddenly felt like they were closing in on me. I needed air. I needed to think. Most of all, I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. With shaking fingers, I dialed Kate's number. Kate Wilson had been my best friend since college, and she'd never been a fan of Dan's swift remarriage after his divorce from Rebecca. "Something about him just doesn't sit right with me," she'd said at our engagement party, but I'd written it off as overprotectiveness. "Jenny? What's wrong?" Kate's voice came through clear and concerned. She could always tell when something was off even through the phone. "Can you come over? I need you to look at something." My voice cracked despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, don't move." While I waited for Kate, I dug deeper. I pulled up our joint account statements, my hands growing colder with each new discovery. There were large cash withdrawals, transfers to an account I didn't recognize, and more charges that aligned perfectly with Rebecca's social media posts from the past few months. How had I missed this? I'd been so caught up in landing a major client at work, staying late at the office, believing Dan when he said he'd handle our finances since I was so busy. The sound of Kate's key in the door made me jump. After Dan and I got married, we'd given Kate and her husband Mark spare keys to our place, just in case. Now I was grateful for that decision. Kate burst in, still wearing her teaching clothes, her dark hair damp from the rain. One look at my face and she dropped her bag, rushing to my side. "What happened?" I wordlessly turned my laptop toward her, watching as her eyes widened with each scroll. That son of a... she muttered, pulling out her own phone. A few quick searches pulled up more of Rebecca's social media posts. Jenny, look at this. There were dozens of photos spanning the past 3 months. Rebecca at expensive restaurants in Seattle, shopping sprees in Vancouver, spa weekends in wine country. Each location, each date matched perfectly with charges on my credit card. And in some photos, if you looked carefully in the background reflections or at the edges of the frame, you could just make out Dan's familiar silhouette. I'm going to kill him, Kate declared, already pulling up her husband Mark's number. Mark's an accountant. He can help us document all of this. But I barely heard her. My eyes were fixed on a particular photo from 2 weeks ago. Rebecca was showing off a stunning sapphire ring, claiming it was a treat to myself. The same day, there was a charge on my card from Tiffany & Co. for an amount that made my stomach lurch. I knew that conference story sounded fishy, Kate was saying as she paced our living room. Mark's firm was supposed to be at that same conference, but when I mentioned it to him, he had no idea what I was talking about. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. All those late nights at the office, the sudden business trips, the way Dan had insisted on handling our finances when I got busy with work. He'd even encouraged me to take on more clients, saying we could use the extra income for our future. Our future. The thought made me laugh, a hollow sound that scared even me. Jenny? Kate's voice was gentle now as she sat beside me. What do you want to do? I stared at the photo of Rebecca with my ring, because that's what it was, wasn't it? My ring, bought with my money, given to my husband's ex-wife. The woman he'd sworn was ancient history, who he claimed had been the one to end things, who he said he was glad to be rid of. I want to understand why, I whispered, more to myself than to Kate. How long has this been going on? Was anything real? Kate squeezed my hand. First, we need to protect you, legally and financially. Then we can figure out the why. She was right, of course. Kate was always right about these things. With trembling fingers, I picked up my phone again, this time dialing Pacific Northwest Credit Union's fraud department. As I waited on hold, listening to cheerful music that felt completely at odds with my crumbling world, I noticed a text from Dan. Conference running late. Don't wait up. Love you. Love you. The words made my chest ache. How many times had he sent similar messages while actually being with Rebecca? How many lies had I believed because I trusted him, because I thought we were happy, because I was too busy building our future to see he was destroying our present? The hold music stopped, and a friendly voice came on the line. Pacific Northwest Credit Union Fraud Department. This is Michael speaking. How can I help you today? I took a deep breath, feeling Kate's supportive hand on my shoulder. Hi, I need to report fraudulent charges on my credit card and I need to know what options I have regarding a joint account that may have been compromised. As I began the process of untangling my financial life from Dan's, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Hurt, anger, betrayal. Yes, but also something else. Something that felt surprisingly like relief. The weight of all the small doubts, the tiny inconsistencies I'd pushed aside, the subtle signs I'd ignored. It was lifting, replaced by clarity. Kate was already texting Mark, asking him to come over with his laptop and his expertise. She was also ordering food, knowing I probably hadn't eaten since making my discovery. This was why she was my best friend. She knew what I needed before I did. Jenny, she said softly as I hung up with the bank, you should check your other cards too, and your savings account. She was right again. By the time Mark arrived with his laptop and 3 bags of Thai food from our favorite place on 23rd Avenue, we'd discovered the full extent of Dan's betrayal. It wasn't just the credit card. He'd been systematically moving money from our joint savings into a separate account, One that I quickly learned was being used to fund a lavish lifestyle with Rebecca that I never knew existed. Mark, bless him, took one look at the financial records and went into full accountant mode. "This is actually good," he said, already creating spreadsheets. "The clearer the paper trail, the better for you legally." Legally? The word felt foreign in my mouth. Was that where this was heading? "Jenny," Kate said gently, "he's stealing from you. This isn't just about the marriage anymore. This is fraud." Fraud. Another word that didn't feel real. How had my life turned into something that involved words like fraud and legal action? Just this morning, I'd been worried about client presentations and whether to try that new coffee place near the office. A notification popped up on my phone, another Instagram post from Rebecca. This time it was a photo of a sunset beach, yoga pose with the caption, "Finding my peace." Sometimes you have to let go of your past to embrace your future. Let go of your past. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so painful.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Rebecca wasn't letting go of anything. She was actively participating in destroying my present while using my money to fund her future. "I need some air," I announced suddenly, standing up from the dining table where we'd spread out all the evidence of my unraveling life. Kate and Mark exchanged worried glances. "I'll come with you," Kate offered, but I shook my head. "I need a minute alone. Just stay here and keep working on the documentation, please?" They reluctantly agreed, making me promise to keep my phone on and not go far. I grabbed my rain jacket and headed out into the evening, the persistent Portland drizzle matching my mood perfectly. As I walked along the wet sidewalks of the Pearl District, past the artisan coffee shops and boutique storefronts that had always made me feel so sophisticated and established, I tried to make sense of it all. When had it started? Had Dan ever really loved me? Or had I just been a convenient source of income? Was Rebecca laughing at me in all those Instagram posts, knowing she was spending my money? My phone buzzed again. Another text from Dan. "Missing you. Can't wait to be home." I stopped walking, staring at the message through blurring eyes. The casual cruelty of it, the easy lies, it all hit me at once. I found myself outside the daily grind, where Dan and I had our first date. Through the window, I could see couples, sitting close together, sharing warm drinks and intimate conversations, trusting each other with their hearts just like I had. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to cry, wasn't going to beg for explanations or closure. Dan and Rebecca thought they had it all figured out, thought they were so clever with their scheme, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I pulled out my phone one last time, opening my banking app. In less than 5 minutes, I'd transferred every penny from our joint accounts into a new account the bank had helped me set up earlier. Let Dan try to explain to Rebecca why her next expensive dinner wouldn't go through. Then I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and headed back to my townhouse where Kate and Mark were waiting. I had work to do, a plan to make, and a life to reclaim. They say you never really know someone until you divorce them. But sometimes you don't really know them until you check your credit card statement. If you want to know what happened next, and how I turned this betrayal into the best thing that ever happened to me, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Rain pelted against the windows of Kate and Mark's craftsman house in Laurelhurst as we spread documents across their antique dining table. The warm glow of pendant lights cast shadows over bank statements, credit card bills, and printed screenshots that told a story more twisted than I'd initially imagined. Mark's laptop screen glowed with elaborate spreadsheets, each tab revealing a new layer of financial deception. "Look at this pattern," Mark said, pointing to a series of transactions. "Every third Friday, there's a transfer of exactly $2,750 to an account we haven't traced yet. It's been happening for 8 months." He adjusted his glasses, frowning at the screen. The amounts are specific enough to avoid automatic fraud detection, but large enough to build up significantly over time. Kate leaned over his shoulder, her teacher's planning notebook now repurposed for documenting our findings. And these transfers always happen right after Jenny's biggest client payments clear. He's been watching your income patterns. The realization hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been pulling late nights at the agency, proud of growing my client base, Dan had been methodically monitoring my earnings, calculating exactly how much he could siphon away without raising suspicions. I thought of all the times he'd encouraged me to take on more work, claiming we needed to build our nest egg. Now I understood. I'd been building a nest egg all right, just not for us. There's something else, Mark said, clicking to a new tab. These charges at Harbor Light Restaurant, they're not just random dates. He pulled up my calendar app, which I'd given him access to in the spirit of full disclosure. Every time you had a late client meeting marked in your calendar, there's a corresponding charge at Harbor Light. Always for 2 people, always with an expensive wine purchase. The pieces clicked into place. Harbor Light was where Dan had proposed to me. The thought of him taking Rebecca there, to our special place, made my stomach turn. But the methodical nature of it was what truly chilled me. He'd turned my busy work schedule into opportunities, using my career success to fund his double life. Kate disappeared into her kitchen, returning with a fresh pot of tea and her signature determined expression. We need to dig deeper into Rebecca's social media. Not just Instagram, everything. If they've been this calculated with the money, they've probably left other traces. For the next 3 hours, we documented everything. Rebecca's Facebook check-ins matched perfectly with unexplained charges on my cards. Her LinkedIn showed she'd recently become a private wellness consultant with a suspiciously vague business description. When we cross-referenced the dates of her business registration with my accounts, we found a large withdrawal that exactly matched typical incorporation fees. I think, Mark said slowly, they've been using your money to set up some kind of business front. Look at these recurring transfers to Zen Life LLC. That's got to be connected to her new venture. My phone buzzed with a text from Dan. Conference wrapping up tomorrow. Picked up something special for you. The casual audacity of his lies made me feel slightly hysterical. Something special? Like the sapphire ring he'd bought for Rebecca. With my money? Kate grabbed my phone before I could respond. Don't tip our hand, she advised. We need to document everything before he realizes we know. She was right, of course. The more evidence we gathered, the stronger my position would be. As midnight approached, Mark created a secure digital folder with everything we'd found. Spreadsheets tracking every fraudulent charge, screenshots of Rebecca's social media posts matched with corresponding transactions, timelines of Dan's supposed business trips aligned with their actual locations. The pattern was undeniable, and it went far beyond a few stolen credit card charges. You know what bothers me most? I said, staring at a particularly damning spreadsheet. The precision of it all. This wasn't just opportunistic theft. They planned this, probably for months before they started taking money. They studied my schedule, my income patterns, even my habits for checking accounts. Kate reached across the table and squeezed my hand, which means they knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was calculated. Just then, Mark's laptop pinged with a notification. He'd set up alerts for any new charges on my remaining active accounts. Jenny, he said, his voice tight. They just booked flights. 2 first-class tickets to Bali, departing next month. I felt a strange calm settle over me as I looked at the charge. Almost $15,000 for plane tickets, charged to my business credit card, the one I kept for large client expenses. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. That's it, Kate declared, pulling out her phone. We're calling Patricia first thing tomorrow. Patricia Chen was the best divorce attorney in Portland, known for handling high-profile cases involving financial fraud. Kate had already reached out to her office earlier, but now it felt urgent. As we continued digging, more patterns emerged. Dan had been systematically selling off our joint investments, always just below the threshold that would require my signature. The money had been funneled through a series of accounts, eventually ending up in the mysterious Zen Life LLC or being spent on luxury purchases. I found myself thinking about the early days of our relationship, how Dan had insisted on keeping some of our accounts separate for tax purposes. At the time, I'd seen it as a sign of his financial responsibility. Now I realized he'd been laying groundwork, creating channels he could later exploit. Around 2 a.m, Kate made up their guest room for me. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed, surrounded by Kate's colorful throw pillows and the sound of Portland rain, I pulled up the photos from my wedding day on my phone. There we were, standing under an arch of white roses at the Japanese garden, looking blissfully happy. Dan's smile seemed so genuine, his eyes full of what I thought was love. Had it all been an act? Or had something changed along the way? Sleep eluded me as questions tumbled through my mind. How had Rebecca re-entered the picture? They'd been divorced for 2 years when I met Dan, and he'd always claimed it was an amicable but final split. Had they been in contact this whole time? Was I just a convenient source of funding for their eventual reunion? Dawn was breaking when I gave up on sleep and wandered down to Kate's kitchen. To my surprise, she was already up, nursing a cup of coffee and looking at her phone with an intense expression. "You need to see this," she said as I poured myself a cup. She handed me her phone, open to Rebecca's fitness Instagram account. There, in her latest post, was a photo of her doing a complicated yoga pose on a beach. But it wasn't the pose that caught my attention. It was the caption. "Big changes coming. Can't wait to announce my new wellness venture." Sometimes the universe has a way of bringing everything full circle. Our Zen life, new beginnings. The post was time-stamped just hours ago, which meant while I was uncovering their fraud, they were already planning their next move. The casual arrogance of it made my blood boil. Mark came downstairs, already dressed for work, but looking like he hadn't slept much either. "I did some digging into Zen Life LLC," he said, opening his laptop. "It was registered 3 months ago, using a shell company as the primary owner. But guess who signed as a secondary guarantor? Dan. He used our home address." The implications were staggering. They weren't just stealing my money for a lavish lifestyle. They were building an entire business with it. A business that, on paper, I had no connection to despite unknowingly funding its entire setup. Kate's phone rang, making us all jump. It was Patricia Chen's office. They had an opening at 9 a.m. if we could make it. As Kate confirmed the appointment, I felt a shift inside me. The shock and hurt were still there, but they were being overshadowed by something else. Determination. I spent the next hour preparing for the meeting, organizing our evidence into clear chronological order. Mark had prepared a detailed financial analysis showing the full scope of the theft, nearly $200,000 over 8 months, not counting the investments Dan had liquidated or the credit card charges we were still uncovering. As I got ready to meet, the lawyer putting on the power suit I'd worn to land my biggest client, I caught my reflection in Kate's guest bathroom mirror. I looked different somehow, older maybe, or just wiser. The naive woman who had trusted so completely was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone ready to fight back. My phone buzzed again. Dan sending a selfie from what was supposedly his conference. But what I now knew was his Hawaiian getaway with Rebecca. "Last day of meetings. Can't wait to be home with you." I showed the message to Kate, who had been hovering protectively all morning. She took one look and her expression hardened. "Save it," she said. "Every lie is more evidence." The rain had finally stopped as we drove downtown to Patricia Chen's office. Portland was emerging from the morning mist, the streets beginning to fill with people starting their normal Tuesday routines. How strange to think that just 24 hours ago, I had been one of them, blissfully unaware that my life was about to change forever. Mark had taken the morning off work to come with us, bringing his laptop and all our documentation. As we rode the elevator to the 20th floor of the glass office tower, I felt surprisingly calm. We had the evidence. We had the truth. Now it was time to use it. Patricia Chen's office was exactly what you'd expect from Portland's top divorce attorney. Sleek, modern, with stunning views of Mount Hood in the distance. The woman herself was a sharp contrast to her serene surroundings. Intense, focused, and radiating efficient energy. "Tell me everything," she said after the introductions were complete. "And please, don't leave out any details. In cases like this, it's often the small things that matter most." So I told her everything, from the first discovered credit card, charges to the complex web of financial manipulation we'd uncovered. Mark presented his analysis, and Kate contributed her observations about patterns in Dan and Rebecca's behavior. Patricia listened intently, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When we finished, she looked up with a slight smile that somehow managed to be both professional and predatory. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "I want you to know that you've done exactly the right thing by gathering all this evidence before confronting your husband. Most people in your situation act emotionally first, which often allows the perpetrator to hide assets or destroy evidence." She paused, reviewing Mark's spreadsheets again. "What we have here is more than just marital fraud. This crosses into criminal territory." The word criminal echoed in my head. Despite everything we'd uncovered, I hadn't quite allowed myself to think of Dan as a criminal. A liar, yes. A cheater, absolutely. But a criminal? "Here's what we're going to do," Patricia continued, her tone brisk and confident. "First, we're going to file for emergency orders to freeze all your joint assets. Then, we're going to document everything. Every charge, every transfer, every lie. We'll build a case so solid that when we finally confront him, he'll have no choice but to cooperate." As Patricia outlined our strategy, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This wasn't just about my broken heart anymore. This was about justice, about consequences, about standing up for myself. "One more thing," Patricia added as our meeting drew to a close. "Don't underestimate how desperate they might become when they realize their scheme is exposed. People who are capable of this level of deception can be dangerous when cornered." I thought about Dan's carefully constructed lies, the methodical way he'd exploited my trust, the calculated precision of his theft. Yes, I realized, he could be dangerous. But so could I. He just didn't know it yet. The moment everything truly shattered wasn't in Patricia Chen's sleek downtown office, or at Kate's dining room table surrounded by evidence. It happened at Zenflow Yoga Studio on a quiet Wednesday afternoon. I hadn't planned to be there. In fact, I'd been avoiding this part of the Alberta Arts District since discovering Rebecca's connection to it, but my usual route home was blocked by construction, forcing me to detour past the very place I'd been trying to ignore. I might have driven right past it if I hadn't noticed Dan's car parked in the back lot. His silver Tesla, bought with what I now knew was partly my money, sat there in broad daylight when he was supposed to be in Seattle for a real estate closing. The sight of it stopped me cold. Through the studio's large windows, I could see a class in session. Rebecca was at the front, leading a group through sun salutations, her designer yoga wear probably purchased with my credit card. But it was the banner behind her that made my blood run cold. Zen Life Wellness Center, grand opening next month. The same Zen Life LLC that had been siphoning money from my accounts. The same business that Dan had secretly co-signed for. Only now it wasn't just a suspicious name on a bank statement. It was real, tangible, and right in front of me. I pulled into the coffee shop parking lot across the street, my hands shaking as I cut the engine. Part of me wanted to storm in there to confront them both, but Patricia's words echoed in my mind. Don't let them know you're onto them. Not until we have everything in place. So instead, I sat and watched. The class ended, and students began filtering out. A few lingered, chatting with Rebecca, handing her what looked like pre-registration forms. She was already selling memberships for the new center. My money was literally funding her fresh start, her new business venture, her entire future. Then, Dan emerged from the back office, and the scene that unfolded before me was like watching a movie about strangers. He wrapped his arms around Rebecca from behind, kissing her neck as she laughed and leaned into him. They looked happy, comfortable, like this was their normal, everyday routine. My phone buzzed, a text from Dan. Closing running late. Grab dinner without me? The casualness of his lie, sent while he stood there embracing his ex-wife, made something break inside me. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about years of calculated deception, about two people systematically dismantling my life while building their own. I don't remember driving to Kate's house. I just remember finding myself on her porch, barely able to breathe. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside, past her surprised husband who was just getting home from work, and into their cozy kitchen. I saw them, I managed to say, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. At her yoga studio. They're not even hiding it anymore. Not from anyone except me. Kate's face hardened as I described the scene I'd witnessed. Mark, who'd been hovering in the doorway, immediately pulled out his phone to document Dan's presence in Portland when he was supposedly in Seattle. More evidence for our growing case. There's something else, I said, pulling up the photos I'd managed to take from my parking spot. Look at the people going into the studio. Really look at them. Kate squinted at my phone screen. Then her eyes widened. Wait, is that Carol from the real estate office? And isn't that Sarah from your yoga class? She was right. Looking at the photos now, I recognized several faces. Women I knew, women from my social circle, some even from Dan's real estate office. They weren't just random yoga students. They were people from my life, people who must have known about Dan and Rebecca's relationship. How many people knew? I whispered, more to myself than to Kate and Mark. How long have I been the only one who didn't know? Mark cleared his throat uncomfortably. Jenny, there's something else you should see. He opened his laptop, pulling up a local business newsletter. I was going to wait until we had more information, but, well, look. There it was, in black and white, a small announcement about upcoming businesses in the Alberta Arts District. Zen Life Wellness Center, a joint venture between renowned yoga instructor Rebecca Anderson and successful real estate agent Daniel Thompson, promises to bring a revolutionary approach to wellness and mindful living to Portland. The article was dated 3 months ago. While I was planning our anniversary dinner, they were giving interviews about their business venture. While I was working late to build our future, they were building their own. With my money, my connections, my life. Revolutionary approach to wellness, I read aloud, my voice cracking with bitter laughter. Is that what they're calling theft these days? Kate wrapped her arms around me as the tears finally came. Not quiet, dignified tears, but ugly, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. All the shock, anger, and betrayal I'd been holding back while gathering evidence suddenly poured out. I want to destroy them, I whispered when I could finally speak again. Not just legally. I want everyone to know what they did, how they lied, how they stole, how many people they hurt. And we will, Kate promised, her teacher voice coming out, the one she used when laying down absolute law in her classroom. But we're going to do it smart. We're going to do it right. Mark was already typing furiously on his laptop. The business announcement actually helps us, he said. It proves premeditation. They've been planning this for months, using your money to fund it. Patricia's going to have a field day with this. As my tears subsided, a strange calm settled over me. The last pieces of my old life, the lingering doubts, the desperate hope that maybe there was an explanation that would make everything okay, fell away. In their place was a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. I pulled out my own laptop and started writing. Every memory, every suspicious moment I'd dismissed. Every time Dan had encouraged me to work late or take on more clients. The pattern was so clear now. He'd been orchestrating my absence, creating opportunities for their relationship to flourish while using my career success to fund it all. Look at this, I said, pulling up my calendar from the past year. Every time I had a major client meeting or deadline, there's a corresponding class at ZenFlow. They were using my busiest times to meet, to plan, probably to laugh about how oblivious I was. Kate leaned over my shoulder, her expression darkening as she saw the pattern emerge. They got cocky, she observed. That's good for us. Arrogant people make mistakes. Just then, my phone lit up with another text from Dan. Closing finished early. Heading to airport now. See you tonight. Attached was a selfie of him supposedly at SeaTac Airport. A photo I now knew was from a previous trip. Reply, Kate urged. Act normal. Let them think they still have the upper hand. I stared at my phone, at the face of the man I'd loved and trusted. The man who'd been systematically destroying my life while pretending to build our future. Can't wait, I typed back, adding a heart emoji for good measure. Safe flight. The lie felt bitter on my tongue, but also strangely empowering. Two could play at this game of deception, and I was finally ready to play. Mark printed out the business announcement, adding it to our growing file of evidence. You know, he said thoughtfully. Starting a business with fraudulently obtained money. That's not just civil court territory anymore. That's criminal fraud. The word criminal should have shocked me, should have made me flinch. Instead, it felt right. Dan and Rebecca weren't just cheaters or liars. They were criminals. And they had left a paper trail a mile wide. I spent the next few hours documenting everything I could remember about the yoga studio. Class schedules, regular attendees, anything that might help establish the timeline of their deception. Kate made calls to mutual friends, carefully fishing for information without revealing what we knew. The picture that emerged was devastating. Their relationship had been an open secret in certain circles for months. People had seen them together at restaurants, at business meetings, even weekend getaways. Everyone had assumed I knew, that we had some kind of arrangement. I'm going to be sick, I muttered, reading through messages Kate had received. Friends expressing relief that it was finally out in the open. Acquaintances admitting they'd felt awkward keeping the secret. Even my favorite barista at the Daily Grind admitted she'd seen them together regularly during my morning client meetings. We should talk to Patricia, Mark said, already reaching for his phone. This changes things. The business announcement, the public nature of their relationship. It's not just fraud anymore. It's a whole different level of deception. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a notification from my banking app. Another large transfer had just been attempted from our joint account to Zen Life LLC. They were getting bolder, less careful, about covering their tracks. Let it go through, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Let them think everything's fine. Let them keep digging their hole deeper. Kate looked at me with a mixture of concern and admiration. Jenny, are you sure? They're taking more of your money. I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. Every transaction is more evidence. Every public appearance together is proof of their deception. Let them think they're winning. It'll make the fall that much harder when it comes. Just then, another text. From Dan. Just landed. Traffic's bad. Might be another hour. I knew without checking that his location sharing would show him somewhere between Seattle and Portland, carefully orchestrated to support his lie. I thought about him and Rebecca, at the yoga studio, planning their future with my money. I thought about all the people who had known, who had watched me work myself to exhaustion while they funded their secret life with the fruits of my labor. You know what the worst part is? I said to Kate and Mark. They're not even trying. That hard to hide it anymore. They're so confident in their lie, so sure of their control over me, that they're literally building a business together in my own city. Kate squeezed my hand. That's their mistake. Pride comes before the fall. I looked at the growing pile of evidence on the table: bank statements, business announcements, social media posts, witness accounts. Each piece alone told only part of the story, but together they painted a picture of betrayal so complete, so calculated, that it took my breath away. "When do we move?" Mark asked quietly. "When do we let them know that their game is up?" I picked up the business announcement, running my fingers over the words that proved how thoroughly I'd been deceived. "Not yet," I said. "Let them have their grand opening. Let them think everything's perfect. Let them feel completely safe and secure." "And then?" Kate prompted. A small, cold smile curved my lips. "And then we show them exactly what happens when you underestimate the woman you're stealing from." I sat in Dr. Sarah Mitchell's sunlit office in the Pearl District, surrounded by tasteful, abstract art and the gentle bubbling of a meditation fountain. My hands were wrapped around a cup of herbal tea I hadn't touched. This wasn't a therapy session. Sarah was one of Portland's most respected forensic accountants and Kate's college roommate. "The level of financial manipulation here is impressive," Sarah said, scrolling through Mark's meticulously organized spreadsheets. "They created a perfect storm, using your busy season at work, your trust in your husband, and your natural tendency to delegate financial matters when overwhelmed. Classic predatory behavior." I watched as she highlighted different sections of the documents, her expert eyes catching patterns we'd missed. "Look here," she pointed to a series of transactions. "They didn't just take your money, they used your credit history, your business reputation to secure additional funding. The Zen Life business loans? They're backed by your assets, not theirs." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. How is that even possible? Sarah's expression hardened. "Because Daniel Thompson is still your husband, with access to your financial information. He used your business's excellent credit rating and assets as collateral. On paper, it looks like a spouse supporting their partner's business venture." A knock at the door interrupted us. Grace Chen, Patricia's younger sister and fellow attorney, entered with a sleek leather briefcase. The Chen sisters were known for tag-teaming cases that crossed the line between civil and criminal law. "I spoke with the bank's fraud department," Grace announced, pulling out her laptop. "They're launching an internal investigation. And Jenny, you're not their only victim." My head snapped up. "What do you mean?" Grace pulled up several documents. 3 other women have reported similar patterns of financial manipulation involving Zen Life LLC, all successful businesswomen, all with connections to either Dan's real estate work or Rebecca's yoga circles. Sarah let out a low whistle. They were running a whole operation. "More like a long con," Grace corrected. "They targeted women with specific financial profiles, successful, busy, trusting, used the yoga studio to gather information about potential marks. Rebecca would befriend them, Dan would handle their real estate needs, and slowly they'd gain access to their finances. The scope of their deception made me feel dizzy. How did we miss this?" "Because they're good at what they do," Sarah said quietly. "And because they understood something fundamental about successful women. We're often so busy breaking glass ceilings that we don't see the cracks forming in our personal lives." Grace's phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "The other victims want to meet. They're willing to join forces." I thought about other women, sitting in their homes or offices, discovering the same betrayal I had, feeling the same shock, the same shame, the same rage. Set it up. That evening, I found myself in a private room at Cascade Heights Country Club, face to face with 3 women whose stories eerily mirrored my own. There was Michelle Zhang, a brilliant software engineer, Sofia Rodriguez, who owned a chain of successful food trucks, and Dr. Andrea Parker, a renowned pediatric surgeon. They approached me after my divorce, Michelle explained, her hands shaking slightly as she spoke. Rebecca offered private yoga sessions, said they'd help me heal. Dan handled the sale of my marital home. They became my support system, right when I was most vulnerable. Sophia nodded. Same playbook. Rebecca joined my gym, always booked sessions when I was there. Dan accidentally ran into me at coffee shops. They spent months building trust before they ever mentioned business opportunities. The wellness center was supposed to be a joint venture, Andrea added bitterly. A place where working women could find balance, they said. I invested $500,000, money I'd saved for my children's education. Patricia and Grace exchanged glances as they documented each woman's story. The pattern was undeniable. Dan and Rebecca weren't just opportunistic thieves. They were calculating predators who had turned financial fraud into an art form. Here's what we know, Patricia summarized. They've taken approximately $8 million from the 4 of you combined. They've used your collective assets and credit to secure another $3 million in business loans. The wellness center is set to open in 3 weeks, with over 200 prepaid memberships sold. They're still selling memberships, Sophia interjected. My assistant bought one yesterday. They're charging premium prices, promising exclusive access and personalized programs. Sarah, who had been quietly analyzing financial documents in the corner, looked up. Those membership fees, they're not going to any business account I can trace. The money's being moved offshore almost immediately. The implications settled over the room like a heavy cloud. They weren't just stealing from us, they were planning to take the membership money and disappear, leaving us holding the bag for the business loans. Not if we stop them first, Grace said firmly. We have enough evidence for criminal charges. We can freeze the accounts, seize assets. No, I interrupted, an idea forming. Not yet. Let them keep going. Let them dig themselves deeper. Michelle looked at me skeptically. You want to let them keep stealing? I want to let them think they're winning, I clarified. The grand opening is their end game, right? All those membership fees, all that publicity. That's when they're most vulnerable. Understanding dawned on Patricia's face. A public takedown. Maximum exposure. Exactly, I said. They used our reputations, our good names, to build their scheme. Let's use that same public trust to destroy them. The room buzzed with energy as we began to plan. Each woman brought unique skills to the table. Michelle's tech expertise, Sophia's media connections, Andrea's respected position in the medical community. We weren't just victims anymore. We were a team. Sarah pulled up a detailed timeline on her laptop. The next 3 weeks are crucial. We need to track every transaction, document every interaction. Nothing can be left to chance. Grace started, assigning tasks. Michelle would monitor their digital footprint, looking for any communications or transactions they thought were hidden. Sophia would use her food truck network to gather intelligence about their movements around the city. Andrea would review all the medical claims they were making about their wellness programs, building a case for fraud. What about me? I asked. Patricia smiled. You, Jenny, have the most important job of all. You need to keep them believing that nothing has changed. Can you do that? I thought about Dan's casual lies, about Rebecca's smug Instagram posts, about all the women they'd targeted, all the lives they'd tried to destroy. Oh, I can do that. I learned from the best, after all. As if on cue, my phone lit up with a text from Dan. "Working late again. Beautiful. Don't wait up." Attached was a photo of his office desk, clearly taken days ago based on the newspapers visible in the shot. I showed the text to the group. "See? They're not even trying that hard anymore. They think we're all too busy, too trusting, too embarrassed to compare notes." "That's their weakness," Sarah observed. "They target strong, successful women because they think our strength makes us vulnerable. Too proud to admit we've been deceived, too independent to ask for help." Instead, Andrea added, they created exactly what they feared most: a group of strong women working together. We spent the next few hours refining our plan. Patricia and Grace would handle the legal strategy. Sarah would track the money. Michelle, Sophia, and Andrea would gather evidence from their respective spheres of influence. And I would play my part, the unsuspecting wife, too busy with work to notice what was happening right under her nose. As the meeting wound down, Michelle pulled me aside. "Are you sure you can handle this? Playing nice with them? Knowing what we know?" I thought about all the lies, all the manipulation, all the careful groundwork they'd laid to destroy not just my life, but the lives of these other women. "I'm not playing nice," I corrected. "I'm giving them just enough rope to hang themselves." Walking to my car later, I felt different. The weight of betrayal was still there, but it was lighter somehow, shared among women who understood, who had faced the same deception, and emerged ready to fight back. My phone buzzed again, Rebecca posting another preview of the wellness center. The caption read, "Building something beautiful takes time, trust, and the right partners. Can't wait to share this dream with all of you. Bar Zen Life. Women supporting women." The irony of that hashtag would have made me laugh if it wasn't so infuriating. But they would learn soon enough what women supporting women really looked like, and it would be nothing like what they expected. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sophia's penthouse kitchen as our unlikely team gathered around her massive granite island. The space smelled of fresh coffee and the artisanal pastries from her most popular food truck. This wasn't our usual meeting spot. We'd started rotating locations to avoid drawing attention, and today's strategy session needed the extra space. "Latest intel from my food truck network," Sophia announced, pulling up a detailed map on her tablet. Dan and Rebecca's routine is like clockwork. Every Tuesday and Thursday, they meet at Jade Garden for lunch, thinking they're safe because it's clear across town from their usual spots. Michelle, who'd been typing furiously on her laptop, looked up. "That tracks with the credit card charges. But here's something interesting. They always pay cash at Jade Garden. It's the only place where they don't leave a digital footprint. Because the owner's brother works at the bank where Dan processes his real estate deals," Dr. Andrea Parker added, setting down her coffee cup. "They think they're being clever, building these little networks of complicity." I studied the map, noting the patterns of their movements across Portland. Every mark on the digital surface represented another piece of their deception, another carefully calculated risk they'd taken. They've built their entire scheme around knowing people's schedules, haven't they? They picked Jade Garden because they know I never go to that part of town during lunch hours. Sarah Mitchell, our forensic accountant, spread out a new set of documents across the island. It's not just their meeting spots. Look at these membership sales for Zen Life. She pointed to a color-coded spreadsheet. They're targeting specific time slots, specific demographics. Every person they've scammed has a similar profile. Successful, busy, with predictable routines they could work around. Grace Chen, who'd been quietly observing while making notes, cleared her throat. "That's actually going to help us. Their own pattern recognition is becoming a liability. They're so focused on following their playbook that they're missing obvious warning signs." "Like what?" I asked, leaning forward. "Like the fact that 3 of their newest membership signups are actually undercover investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit." Grace smiled. "They're so confident in their system that they didn't even properly vet their latest marks." A ripple of satisfaction went through the room. We'd been laying this groundwork for days, carefully placing our own pieces on the board while Dan and Rebecca continued their game, oblivious to the net closing around them. "What about the building inspections?" Andrea asked, pulling up her own notes. "My contact at the city planning office came through." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Tell me." "They found something." "Better than something," Andrea replied. "The contractor they hired for the wellness center renovations, he's willing to talk. Turns out they've been cutting corners on everything from electrical work to fire safety systems. They paid him cash to keep it quiet, but he's getting nervous about liability." I felt a chill despite the warm morning sun. They hadn't just been stealing our money, they'd been planning to put people's physical safety at risk too. "We need to move carefully with this," Grace cautioned. "The contractor's testimony is valuable, but we need more than just his word. Michelle, can you access the building's security cameras?" Michelle's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Already on it." They installed a high-end security system last week. Ironically, it's the one thing they didn't cheap out on, but they forgot one critical detail. "What's that?" Sophia asked. "They used my company's software platform to manage it," Michelle grinned. "They have no idea I can see every time they enter or leave the building, every vendor they meet with, every cash transaction they think isn't being recorded." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Dan and Rebecca had chosen their marks, carefully, picking successful women they thought they could manipulate. Instead, they'd handed us the very tools we needed to expose them. "There's something else," I said, pulling up my own phone. "Look at Rebecca's latest Instagram post." The group huddled around my screen. There was Rebecca, posed elegantly in the half-finished wellness center, surrounded by construction materials and wearing a hard hat, like it was a fashion accessory. The caption read, "Building our dreams takes vision, dedication, and the right team. Can't wait to share this transformative space with our founding members. Zen Life, Chacha Women in Business." The comments section is interesting, Michelle noted, scrolling through. "Look how many of their potential victims are right there, publicly documenting their involvement." Sarah was already adding names to her spreadsheet. "This is good. The more we can prove they were actively promoting the business while knowing it was built on fraud, the stronger our case becomes." "Speaking of proof," Sophia interjected, "my contact at the Portland Business Journal reached out. They want to do a feature on Zen Life for their Women Entrepreneurs series. Dan and Rebecca already agreed to an interview next week." Grace's expression turned calculating. "That's perfect. Let them go on record. Every claim they make in Bidoritos and Dardo, that interview is another nail in their coffin." "But we need to be strategic about timing," Andrea cautioned. "If we move too soon, they might realize we're onto them. Too late, and they could disappear with the membership fees." I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, Dan was probably at another real estate showing, telling more lies, building more schemes. Rebecca would be at the wellness center, selling more memberships, weaving more people into their web of deception. 2 weeks, I said finally, turning back to the group. "We let them do the interview. Let them sell more memberships. Let them think everything's going according to plan. Then, 3 days before their grand opening, we strike," Grace finished, understanding dawning on her face. "When they're most exposed, most committed, with the most to lose." Sarah started typing rapidly. "I can have all the financial documentation ready by then. Every transaction, every fraudulent charge, every misappropriated fund. My team can have the safety violations documented and filed with the city," Andrea added. "And I'll have complete surveillance footage showing their pattern of deception," Michelle confirmed. Sophia pulled up her calendar. "I can make sure. Every food blogger and local business reporter in Portland is there to witness it. Nothing like a public takedown to generate headlines." The energy in the room had shifted from strategic planning to something more potent. The combined force of women who'd been underestimated, manipulated, and betrayed, now turning the tables on those who'd tried to destroy them. My phone buzzed. Another text from Dan. "Missing you. Late meeting tonight, but taking you somewhere special this weekend. Love you." I showed the message to the group. They're planning something big, probably another trip or expensive dinner too. "Keep me distracted." "Let them," Grace advised. "Every charge they make now is just more evidence. Every lie they tell is another charge we can add." "Besides," Michelle added with a grim smile, "they've got the wrong idea about what keeps successful women distracted. We're not too busy to notice when we're being scammed. We're just gathering evidence and waiting for the right moment to strike." As our meeting wound down, each woman had her assignments, her role to play in the complex choreography of justice we were orchestrating. But before we dispersed, Andrea raised her glass of coffee and a toast. "To the women they thought they could fool," she said softly. "And to the reckoning they never saw coming." We all raised our cups, the morning sun catching the determination in each pair of eyes. Dan and Rebecca had built their scheme on the assumption that successful women were too proud, too busy, too isolated to compare notes or ask for help. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. As I drove home later, I thought about all the layers of deception we'd uncovered, all the careful planning that had gone into their scheme. They'd studied our habits, our schedules, our tendencies. They'd used our strength, our focus on our careers, our willingness to trust, our desire to build something meaningful, against us. But they'd forgotten something crucial. Those same qualities that made us good targets. Our intelligence, our determination, our resources, made us even better adversaries. They'd chosen their marks carefully, but in doing so, they'd created their own worst nightmare. A group of powerful women with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. My phone buzzed again, Rebecca posting another update about the wellness center's progress. The caption was pure irony. "Success is sweeter when shared with a community of strong women. Together, we rise." Women empowerment. I smiled, thinking of the community she'd inadvertently created, not the one she'd intended to scam, but the one that would ultimately bring her down. Yes, together we would rise, but not in the way she imagined. The next 2 weeks would require patience, precision, and perfect timing. We'd each play our part, gathering evidence, documenting deceits, building our case piece by piece. And when the moment came, when they thought they were about to achieve everything they'd planned, we'd show them exactly what happens when you underestimate the women you've wronged. Evening shadows stretched across the polished concrete floors of Zen Life's reception area as I stood there, watching Dan and Rebecca through the glass walls of their private office. They hadn't noticed me yet. They never did anymore, so confident in their schemes that they'd stopped watching for threats. From where I stood, I could see them laughing over something on Rebecca's laptop, their heads close together, completely at ease in their deception. I hadn't planned on confronting them tonight. Our carefully orchestrated plan wasn't supposed to unfold for another week. But an hour ago, I'd received an alert from Michelle's monitoring system. They were initiating a massive transfer from our joint accounts, one that would have drained every penny I had left. Some things couldn't. Wait for perfect timing. The electronic lock clicked as I used the entrance code I wasn't supposed to have. The sound made them both look up, their expressions shifting from surprise to carefully constructed warmth in the space of a heartbeat. Professional fraudsters, through and through. "Jenny?" Dan's voice held just the right note of pleased surprise. "What are you doing here, honey? I thought you had that big client presentation tonight." I stepped into their office, noting how Rebecca smoothly closed her laptop, how Dan casually moved to stand between me and their desk. Always coordinated, always in sync, like dancers performing a routine they'd practiced 1,000 times. "Funny thing about that presentation," I said, keeping my voice light. "It got rescheduled. so I thought I'd stop by the bank instead. I pulled out my phone, showing them the transfer notification. Want to explain this? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dan's smile flickered but held. Oh, that? Just moving some funds around for the business. You know how it is with startups. Cash flow can be tricky. Tricky, I repeated. Is that what we're calling theft these days? Rebecca stood up, her designer yoga wear somehow making her look both athletic and predatory. Jenny, I think you're confused. Daniel and I are business partners. The transfers are completely legitimate. Business partners, I echoed, letting out a small laugh. Is that all you are? Because the security footage from the Pacific Grand Hotel last weekend tells a different story. They exchanged a quick glance. So fast I would have missed it, if I hadn't been watching for it. Dan stepped forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. Honey, you're obviously upset. Why don't we all sit down and talk about this calmly? Like you talked calmly to Andrea Parker when you convinced her to invest her children's college fund? Or to Michelle Zhang when you used her own software, company's systems to hide your tracks? I watched their faces as each name landed like a blow. Or maybe we should talk about Sofia Rodriguez and how you used her food truck empire's financial records as a template for your fraud. Rebecca's serene mask cracked first. How do you know about them? I finished for her. Turns out successful women talk to each other. Shocking, I know. Must really throw a wrench in your business model. Dan's demeanor changed instantly, the concerned husband act dropping away to reveal something colder, more calculated. Whatever you think you know, you can't prove anything. And making accusations like this, well, that could be considered defamation. Right, Rebecca? Rebecca nodded, recovering her composure. We have dozens of satisfied clients, Jenny. Respected members of the community who believe in what we're building here. Who do you think people will believe? The supportive husband building a successful business? Or the jealous wife making wild accusations? I smiled, pulling out a USB drive. That's an interesting question. Why don't we ask your contractor about the safety violations you paid him? To ignore? Or the bank about the fraudulent loan applications? Or maybe we should talk to your satisfied clients about where their membership fees are really going. Dan moved with unexpected speed, reaching for the USB drive. But I was faster, stepping back out of his reach. Careful, Dan. The security cameras are watching. Michelle's systems are really quite impressive, when they're not being used to commit fraud, that is. What do you want? Dan's voice was tight, controlled, but I could see fear beginning to crack through his facade. Right now, I want you to cancel that transfer. Then we're going to have a very interesting conversation about asset recovery. Rebecca laughed, but there was an edge of hysteria to it. You're bluffing. You can't prove any of this. I pulled out my phone again, this time opening a secure folder. Bank statements, transfer records, hotel receipts, security footage, email transcripts. Should I go on? I looked directly at Rebecca. By the way, how's that sapphire ring Dan bought you? The one charged to my credit card? She unconsciously touched the ring on her finger, then quickly dropped her hand. Dan stepped forward again, but this time his voice was low, threatening. Think very carefully about what you're doing, Jenny. You have no idea what you're getting into. No, Dan, you have no idea what you got into when you decided to steal from me. From all of us. I met his gaze steadily. Cancel the transfer. Now. He stared at me for a long moment, then slowly turned to the computer. I watched as he logged into the banking site, his fingers moving reluctantly across the keyboard. The cancellation confirmation popped up on my phone moments later. This isn't over, Rebecca said, her yoga-toned arms crossed tightly over her chest. We have contracts, agreements. The business is legitimate. Is it? I asked softly. Should we ask the IRS about that? Or maybe the state licensing board? I'm sure they'd be very interested in your creative approach to business registration. Dan's face had gone pale. You wouldn't. It would ruin everything. Like you tried to ruin us? I took a step closer to him. You didn't just steal our money, Dan. You stole our trust, our security, our peace of mind. And for what? So you could play successful entrepreneur with your ex-wife? It wasn't like that, he started, but I cut him off. Save it for the prosecutors. They'll be very interested in your explanation, I'm sure. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and don't bother trying to access any of our accounts again. They've all been frozen pending investigation. Rebecca's composure finally shattered completely. You can't do this. We have commitments, contracts. With money stolen from other women, I finished for her. I wonder how committed your clients will be when they learn the truth about where their membership fees went. Might want to hold off on ordering those fancy yoga mats. As I walked out of their office, I heard Dan call after me. Jenny, wait. We can work this out. Whatever you want, money, a share in the business. I turned back one last time, taking in the scene. Dan with his perfectly tailored suit now wrinkled with stress. Rebecca with her carefully maintained serenity crumbling around her. They looked smaller somehow, less impressive now that their masks had cracked. What I want, I said clearly, is justice. And trust me, that's exactly what I'm going to get. The door closed behind me with a satisfying click, but I didn't leave the building. Instead, I sat down in one of the reception area's overpriced meditation chairs and waited. Within minutes, my phone lit up with messages from both of them. Threats, pleading, attempts at negotiation. I forwarded each message to Grace Chen without responding. Every word they sent was just more evidence, more proof of their desperation and guilt. Through the glass walls, I could see them arguing, gesturing frantically, their perfect partnership fracturing under pressure. An hour passed. They remained in their office, probably trying to figure out how to salvage their scheme. I stayed where I was, a silent sentinel ensuring they couldn't destroy evidence or make any more unauthorized transfers. Finally, Grace's text came through. All accounts secured, restraining orders processed. You can go home now. But I waited a few minutes more, watching as Dan and Rebecca's argument reached a crescendo. Through the glass, I saw him grab his keys, saw her try to stop him. He shrugged her off roughly, so much for their united front. Dan stormed out of the office, barely glancing at me as he passed. Rebecca followed moments later, her yoga-perfect posture now slouched in defeat. Neither of them looked at me as they left, but I could feel the weight of their unspoken threats hanging in the air. Once they were gone, I did one final walkthrough of their office, photographing everything just as Michelle had instructed. The evidence of their fraud was everywhere once you knew where to look. Post-it notes with account numbers, calendars marked with their meeting times, stacks of membership contracts with inflated prices and impossible promises. My phone buzzed. Again, Kate this time. Did it work? I sent her a quick reply. Better than we expected. They cracked faster than we thought they would. Want me to come over? I considered it as I walked to my car. Part of me wanted company, wanted to process everything that had just happened. But another part of me needed time to absorb the reality of what we'd just set in motion. Not tonight. I need to document everything while it's fresh. But tomorrow? You got it. Proud of you, Jen. As I drove home through Portland's evening, traffic, I felt strangely calm. The confrontation had gone almost exactly as we'd planned, but something unexpected had happened too. Seeing them crack, watching their confident facades crumble, had shown me just how weak they really were. They'd built their entire scheme on the assumption that their victims would be too ashamed, too proud, or too busy to fight back. They'd counted on our silence, our isolation, our reluctance to admit we'd been deceived. Instead, they'd created something they never expected. A network of strong women determined to expose their fraud and protect others from falling victim to their schemes. They thought they were hunting lions, but they'd actually walked into a pride. My phone kept buzzing, with messages from Dan and Rebecca, increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of the situation. I ignored them all, focusing on the road ahead. We'd thrown their world into chaos tonight, but this was just the beginning. The real storm was still coming, and when it hit, they'd realize that tonight's confrontation was just a gentle warning breeze compared to the hurricane heading their way. They thought they'd seen me angry? Wait until they met the full force of all the women they'd wronged. Let them spend the night scrambling to cover their tracks, trying to salvage their schemes. We had everything we needed now. Their reactions, their threats, their desperate attempts at damage control. Each move they made just dug their hole deeper. Tomorrow would bring a new phase of our plan, but tonight, I'd accomplished something important. I'd looked my betrayers in the eye and shown them they hadn't broken me. They hadn't even come close. Dawn painted Portland's skyline in shades of rose and gold as I quietly packed the last box in my home office. The townhouse felt different in these early morning hours, not just empty, but hollow, as if it too knew this was the end of something. I'd chosen this time carefully, knowing Dan wouldn't return until later. After last night's confrontation, he'd been frantically calling lawyers, leaving increasingly hostile voicemails that ranged from threats to desperate pleas. Michelle's surveillance system had tracked him to the Riverfront Hotel, where he'd checked in under a business alias. Rebecca had gone dark on social media, her first silence in months. The quiet felt like the eye of a storm, a brief pause before chaos resumed. "That's the last of your crucial documents," Kate whispered, sealing the box with packing tape. We'd been working since 3 a.m., methodically removing every trace of my business and personal papers from the house. Not running away, strategic repositioning, as Grace called it. A soft knock at the front door made us both freeze, but it was only Sophia with her food truck's early morning coffee delivery. "Thought you could use this," she said, setting down a carrier of artisanal lattes. My driver's report Dan's still at the hotel, looking pretty rough. He tried to access the business accounts 4 times overnight. I took a sip of the perfectly crafted lavender latte, letting its warmth steady my nerves. "Any word from Rebecca?" "Actually, yes." Michelle's voice came from my laptop, where she'd been monitoring communications remotely. "She just booked a flight to Bali, one-way ticket leaving next week. Used her personal credit card, not your money this time." The first crack in their united front, exactly as we'd predicted. "Forward the booking details to Grace," I instructed, carefully wrapping my grandmother's crystal paperweight in bubble wrap. "She'll want to add it to the travel restriction petition." Kate paused in her packing, looking around the office that had witnessed so many late nights of work, so many dreams built and broken. "You sure about this? Once we move everything out..." "It's not about the space," I said, tucking the paperweight into my bag. "It's about denying them access to any more of my information. Besides," I managed a small smile, "I think it's time for a change of scenery." Andrea arrived just as the sun fully crested the horizon, her hospital scrubs exchanged for casual clothes that wouldn't draw attention. "Security teams in place," she reported. "If Dan tries to come back before the court order is served, we'll know." We worked in focused silence, each woman knowing her role in this carefully choreographed morning. Everything essential had to be moved: business documents, financial records, family heirlooms, anything that could be used or sold. The furniture could stay. It was just stuff after all, and everything valuable was already documented by our forensic team. "Jenny," Michelle's voice came through the laptop again, more urgent this time. "Dan just checked out of the hotel. He's called Rebecca 6 times in the last hour." "Right on schedule," I murmured, checking my watch. "Grace should be serving him the papers any minute now." As if on cue, my phone lit up with Dan's name. I let it ring through to voicemail, then played it on speaker. "Are you out of your mind? A restraining order?" After everything I've done for you? You have no idea what you're doing, Jenny. No idea who you're dealing with. Call me back immediately, or I swear. Charming, Sophia commented dryly, carefully packing my collection of art books. Should we be worried about those threats? I shook my head, forwarding the voicemail to our legal team. Every threat is just more evidence. Besides, I nodded toward the window where 2 unmarked cars were parked. The investigators are enjoying his performance. The morning progressed, with military precision. Each box was labeled, photographed, and logged into our secure database before being loaded into the waiting vehicles. Michelle's security protocols ensured no digital trace of the move would be visible to Dan's increasingly desperate searches. Movement at Zen Life, Michelle reported around 9. Rebecca just arrived. Well, this is interesting. She's removing items from the office. Personal things, mostly. I exchanged glances with Kate. The partnership was crumbling faster than we'd anticipated. Keep tracking her. If she tries to leave the state. Already flagged with TSA, Michelle confirmed. She's not going anywhere. Around 10, Grace called with an update. Dan's been served. He's claiming he never received the restraining order, despite signing for it. Classic gaslighting attempt. Oh, and you'll love this. He tried to access your business account again. Claimed it was a routine transfer for wellness center expenses. Let me guess, I said, securing the last box of tax documents. The amount matched Rebecca's flight booking exactly? Got it in one. Don't worry, the bank flagged it immediately. The manager actually laughed when he tried to claim it was authorized. By 11, the townhouse's office was empty of anything important. What remained were the carefully curated trappings of success. The expensive desk, the designer lamp, the abstract paintings Dan had insisted would impress clients. All of it seemed hollow now, like a movie set built to tell a story that was never quite true. One last sweep, Andrea announced, leading our final check of the space. Every drawer was photographed empty, every cabinet documented clear. Nothing left to chance, nothing left for them to use or twist. As we finished, my phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. We need to talk. Just us women. I can explain everything. Wow. Kate peered at the message. She's actually trying the sisterhood angle? After everything? I showed the text to Grace, via our secure line. Her response was immediate. Do not engage. Forward all communication through legal channels. She's trying to create reasonable doubt, build a narrative of misunderstanding rather than fraud. Looking around the empty office one last time, I felt a strange mix of emotions. This space had witnessed so many late nights, so many projects, so many dreams. It had also witnessed the systematic betrayal of everything I'd worked for. Ready? Kate asked softly, holding the door. I nodded, picking up my last personal item, a small plant that had somehow survived years of neglect. Let's go. As we locked up, Michelle's voice came through one final time. Dan's on his way. 20. Minutes out, driving fast? Perfect timing, I said, watching as the last unmarked car pulled away with our boxes. Everything's already gone. We drove separately, taking different routes to our secure location. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of Dan's Tesla turning onto our street just as I rounded the corner. His perfect timing, for once, worked. In our favor. My phone started ringing immediately, Dan discovering the empty office, no doubt. Each call went straight to voicemail, each message more revealing than the last. The controlled facade was cracking, revealing the desperation beneath. You think you can just disappear? His voice seethed in one message. Everything in that house belongs to me. Everything you've built was because of me. You're nothing without me, Jenny. Nothing. I smiled grimly, thinking of the evidence safe in our possession, the documents that proved exactly who had built what. Dan had always underestimated me, assumed my success was somehow due to him. That assumption was about to cost him everything. At our secure location, a private office suite Andrea had arranged through hospital connections, we regrouped. Grace joined us, bringing updated court documents and a timeline of Dan's reactions to being served. "He's playing right into our hands," she noted, spreading out the papers. "Every threat, every attempt to access frozen accounts, every violation of the restraining order, it's all documented. The judge is going to love this." My phone buzzed again, Rebecca this time, with a different approach. "Jenny, please, what Dan did was wrong, but I was just trying to build something meaningful, something to help women like us. Can't we talk? About this? Woman to woman?" "Forward that to the group chat," Michelle instructed. "The timestamps match perfectly with their meeting at Jade Garden 10 minutes ago. They're coordinating their stories, trying to drive a wedge between the victims." I stared at the message, marveling at its calculated manipulation. Something to help women like us. As if she hadn't systematically targeted and defrauded multiple successful women. As if her wellness center wasn't built on stolen dreams and betrayed trust. "Should we tell her about tomorrow?" Sophia asked, referring to our next planned move. I shook my head. Let them keep thinking they have time to fix this. The harder they try to cover their tracks, the more evidence they create. As evening fell over Portland, we finished setting up our new base of operations. Every document was secured, every piece of evidence cataloged. Our next moves were planned down to the minute, each woman knowing exactly what role she would play. My phone had finally fallen silent. Dan and Rebecca presumably regrouping, planning their next attempt at damage control. Let them plan. Let them think they still had cards to play. Looking around at these strong, brilliant women who had become my unexpected allies, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this whole nightmare began. Peace. We weren't running, weren't hiding. We were preparing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attempts at manipulation and control. But tonight, in this quiet space surrounded by evidence of their crimes and proof of our resilience, I knew we had already won the most important battle. They thought they were chasing a wounded deer, never realizing they'd stumbled into a wolf pack. Their hunt was over. Ours was just beginning. The early autumn rain tapped against the windows of Grace, Chen's downtown office, as we watched Rebecca's latest Instagram live video unfold on the large conference room screen. Her carefully curated backdrop, a corner of Zen Life's meditation room, couldn't quite hide the strain around her eyes as she addressed her followers. "As many of you have heard, there are some unfortunate rumors circulating about our wellness center," she began, her voice carrying that practiced spiritual calm that had fooled so many. "I want to assure our founding members that everything is proceeding as planned. In fact, we're adding some exciting new programs." "Notice how she keeps touching her neck?" Sarah Mitchell pointed out, making notes. "Classic stress tell. She's done it 12 times in the last 3 minutes." The office door opened quietly as Patricia Chen entered, followed by someone I hadn't expected to see, Laura Thompson, Dan's younger sister. Her presence made me sit up straighter, tension crawling up my spine. Laura and I had once been close, sharing Sunday brunches and shopping trips, until she'd mysteriously distanced herself 6 months ago. "Jenny?" Laura said softly, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I think there's something you need to know." Grace quickly ended Rebecca's live stream replay as Laura took a seat across from me. The rain seemed to grow louder in the sudden silence, matching the pounding of my heart. "I should have told you sooner," Laura began, her voice trembling. "But Dan, he said he'd ruin Mark's career if I said anything." My breath caught. Mark was Laura's husband, a junior partner at Dan's real estate firm. What did he do? It's not just what he did. Laura's eyes filled with tears. It's what I helped him do. The membership lists for Zen Life, I'm the one who compiled them. Dan said it was market research, that he was helping Rebecca restart her career. But then I saw the financial records. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Laura had access to high net worth client lists through her job at a luxury concierge service. She'd unknowingly helped them identify potential victims. "Why are you coming forward now?" Patricia asked gently. Laura pulled out her phone, hands shaking. "Because of this. Dan sent it last night." She played a voicemail that made my blood run cold. Dan's voice, slurred but menacing. "Baby sister, you better keep your mouth shut about those lists. Remember, who got Mark that partnership? One word from me, and you'll both be finished in this town. Family protects family." "There's more," Laura whispered. "Rebecca, she's not just Dan's ex-wife. She's been his partner in everything, right from the start. The divorce was fake. They planned it all, used it to create a sympathetic story. Dan told me it was their greatest performance yet." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Their entire relationship had been orchestrated. The messy divorce, the chance meeting that led to our relationship, even Dan's carefully constructed image as the wounded ex-husband who'd found love again. "The fertility clinic appointment," I said suddenly, remembering the devastating discovery that had seemed like the final betrayal. "Was that part of their plan too?" Laura nodded miserably. "They needed a reason why you wouldn't get pregnant, something to explain why Dan might be distant. The test results were fake, just like everything else." Grace was already typing rapidly on her laptop. "This changes the scope of the fraud charges significantly. If we can prove the divorce was part of their scheme." "I have proof," Laura interrupted, pulling out a USB drive. "Emails, text messages, photos, everything I could save without them noticing. I even have recordings of Dan coaching Rebecca on how to play her role, teaching her things about you that she could use to seem sympathetic." As Michelle began copying the files, I studied Laura's face. "Why didn't you warn me? Even anonymously?" "Because I was a coward," she admitted, tears flowing freely now. "Because Dan's been controlling our family for so long that we forgot how to stand up to him. But last night when he threatened Mark..." She straightened her shoulders. "I realized I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent any longer." Sarah was already analyzing the financial records Laura had brought. "This is incredible," she muttered. "They've done this before, 3 times in other cities. Different names, different businesses, but the same pattern." "Rebecca was always the face of the operations," Laura explained. "Yoga studio in Seattle, meditation center in Vancouver, wellness spa in San Francisco. Dan stayed in the background, playing whatever role they needed: supportive ex-husband, business consultant, even scorned lover once. They'd build up trust, gather investments, then disappear just before everything fell apart." Patricia's expression was fierce as she documented Laura's statement. "How much do you know about their plans for Portland?" "They were planning to make it their biggest score yet. The wellness center was just phase 1. They had plans for a whole chain of centers up and down the West Coast, all funded by stolen money and fraudulent loans. Jenny's business success and connections made her the perfect mark for their expansion plans." The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I thought about all the times Laura had seemed on the verge of saying something, all the worried glances and abrupt departures from family gatherings. She'd been carrying this burden all along. "What happens now?" Laura asked quietly. "Dan will know I came forward." "Now you're under our protection," Grace stated firmly. "We'll need you to make an official statement, but first, we're getting you and Mark somewhere safe." As if on cue, my phone lit up with Dan's number. Laura flinched at the sight of it. Instead of letting it go to voicemail, I put it on speaker. "Jenny, baby, please." His voice was honey smooth again, all traces of last night's threats gone. I know you're upset about the business arrangements, but let me explain. Better yet, come to the Wellness Center tonight. Rebecca's organized a special preview session for our founding members. We can talk everything through, figure out a way, forward together. I met Grace's eyes, seeing the same recognition there. They were planning something big, one last attempt to regain control of the situation. Send them a message, Patricia advised. Let them think Laura's information is still secret. I took a deep breath. What time? I asked Dan, keeping my voice neutral. 7 o'clock. Just you, me, and Rebecca. We'll show you everything, make you understand why we did what we did. You'll see. This could be amazing for all of us. After ending the call, the room erupted into activity. Grace was calling in additional security, Michelle was setting up extra surveillance, and Sarah was documenting the new financial connections Laura had revealed. They're getting desperate, Patricia observed. This preview session, it's either an attempt to manipulate you back into line or a cover for their escape plan, I finished. Either way, we'll be ready. Laura touched my arm hesitantly. Jenny, I'm so sorry. You have to believe me. When I first started helping them, I didn't know what they were really doing. I looked at this woman who had been my sister-in-law, who had carried the weight of her brother's crimes for so long. It's not your fault, I said softly. Dan's been manipulating all of us. The difference is, you found the courage to stop it. As our team prepared for tonight's confrontation, I couldn't help but think about the layers of deception that had been revealed. Every person in Dan and Rebecca's orbit had been carefully chosen, their roles in the grand performance meticulously planned. Even their victims had been selected for maximum impact and minimum risk. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that their victims would remain isolated, too ashamed or proud to reach out for help. Instead, they'd created a network of strong women determined to expose their crimes and protect others from falling into their trap. Now, with Laura's evidence adding to our case, their carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse. Tonight's preview session wouldn't go according to their plans. Instead, it would become the stage for their final act, one they hadn't scripted and couldn't control. The autumn sun was setting over Portland as we finalized our preparations, casting long shadows through Grace's office windows. In a few hours, I would face Dan and Rebecca again, but this time I wouldn't be alone. This time, I had an army of strong women behind me, each bringing their own skills and determination to the fight. Laura had taken the first step toward redemption by coming forward. Now it was our turn to ensure her courage wasn't wasted. Dan and Rebecca had written a script for tonight, but they were about to learn that the best performances are often the ones that go off script. Winter rain hammered against the windows of my temporary office in downtown Portland as I stared at the document on my screen. The timestamp read 3:27 a.m., but sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. What I'd just discovered in Laura's files made everything else seem like mere preparation for the real betrayal. You need to see this now, I texted Michelle, knowing she'd be awake. As our tech expert, she'd been working through Laura's files methodically, but I'd decided to do my own deep dive. Sometimes an outsider's eyes could spot patterns others might miss. Michelle's response was immediate. On my way. Don't open anything else until I get there. The file in question was buried in layers of encrypted folders, a video from 3 years ago, before I'd even met Dan. In it, he and Rebecca sat in what looked like a hotel room, casually discussing their next target. Me. They'd planned everything. Not just the financial fraud or the business scheme, but my entire relationship with Dan. Every moment I'd thought was chance had been carefully orchestrated, down to our accidental meeting at my friend's wedding. Michelle arrived within 15 minutes, her laptop under her arm and concern etched on her face. What did you find? Without speaking, I played the video. Rebecca's voice filled the room. She's perfect, Dan. Self-made success, no family money. To complicate things, just naive enough about relationships to be vulnerable. Plus, she has exactly the kind of client network we need for the next phase. Dan's response made my stomach turn. Already done the preliminary background check. Her business is growing fast, but she keeps her personal accounts surprisingly simple. No complex investments, no family trusts. Clean and easy. The rest of the video was a detailed dissection of my life, my habits, my vulnerabilities. They'd studied me like a target, identifying exactly how to manipulate me emotionally and financially. "There's more," I said quietly, opening another folder. "Look at the dates on these documents." Michelle leaned in, her eyes widening as she scrolled through the files. "These incorporation papers for Zen Life. They're from 4 years ago, before you even met Dan." Exactly. They've been planning this wellness center scheme for years. I wasn't just their mark for money. I was chosen specifically because my client list included everyone they needed for the next phase of their operation. The documents told a story more calculated than we'd imagined. Zen Life wasn't just a fraudulent business. It was the culmination of years of careful planning. They'd built their entire scheme around accessing my network of successful, busy professional women who might be interested in an exclusive wellness center. My phone buzzed. Grace Chen calling at this ungodly hour. "Jenny, are you looking at the files? You knew?" "Just found out. Patricia's been going through the legal implications. This changes everything. It's not just fraud anymore. This is long-term criminal conspiracy." I thought about every client meeting I'd ever invited Dan to, every business contact I'd introduced him to. He hadn't just been playing the supportive husband. He'd been gathering intelligence, identifying potential victims. "We need to tell..." "The others," Michelle said, already typing. "Sophia, Andrea, everyone they targeted through your connections." But I was staring at another file, a detailed psychological profile someone had compiled about me years ago. It analyzed everything from my work habits to my dating history, identifying exactly what kind of man I would be most likely to trust. They had help, I realized, scanning the document. This level of detail. This isn't just background research. Someone close to me helped them. Michelle was already running a trace on the document properties. "The author properties have been stripped, but there might be metadata we can recover." My mind raced through possibilities. Who had known me well enough 4 years ago to compile this kind of profile? Who had access to such personal information about my patterns, my vulnerabilities? The answer hit me like a physical blow, just as Michelle's recovery program finished running. "No," I whispered, staring at the author name that appeared. "It can't be. James Carter, my former therapist." "Call Patricia," Michelle said urgently, already reaching for her phone. "We need to know if this violates patient confidentiality laws." But I was already pulling up more files, seeing the pattern with horrible clarity. James had been my therapist during my post-startup burnout phase 4 years ago. He'd helped me work through my workaholic tendencies, my trust issues, my fears about relationships. Or had he? Had every session been carefully documented and passed on to Dan and Rebecca, giving them the perfect playbook for manipulation? Grace arrived 20 minutes later with Patricia in tow, both of them looking as if they'd never gone to bed. One look at my face, and they knew this was worse than we'd thought. "Show us everything," Patricia instructed, pulling out her laptop. From the beginning. For the next 2 hours, we pieced together the extent of the conspiracy. James Carter hadn't just violated patient confidentiality, he'd been an active participant in identifying potential targets for Dan and Rebecca's schemes. His patient list had been a goldmine of successful women, all professionally accomplished but personally vulnerable. "Wait," Grace said suddenly, pulling up another document. "Look at these dates. Carter sold his practice 3 years ago, right? After your last session. Moved to Arizona, supposedly." Michelle's fingers flew across her keyboard. No record of him practicing in Arizona, but there's a James Carter listed as a silent partner in 3 failed wellness centers in other. cities. The same pattern as Dan and Rebecca's previous schemes. The betrayal felt like a physical wound. Every breakthrough I'd thought I'd made in therapy, every moment of vulnerability I'd shared, had been weaponized against me. "We need to find him," Patricia stated, already drafting legal documents. "His testimony could blow this whole operation wide open." But I was looking at something else, a series of email exchanges between James and Dan, discussing other potential targets. Women I knew, women I'd recommended to James when they were going through tough times. "Oh God," I breathed, recognizing names. Sarah from my yoga class, Maria from the Chamber of Commerce, Lily from my business mentorship program. I sent them all to him. "None of this is your fault," Grace said firmly. "You were trying to help people. They're the ones who perverted that trust." My phone lit up with a text from Dan. "Missing you. The wellness center isn't the same without your energy. Come by tomorrow? We can talk about everything." The casual manipulation in his message made me feel physically ill. How many times had he used my own therapy revelations to craft the perfect response to my doubts or fears? "We need to move faster," Michelle said, still scanning through files. "These documents suggest they're planning to launch similar operations in other cities. They've already identified potential targets." Patricia was already making calls, her voice sharp with urgency. "I want every file from Carter's practice subpoenaed. Every patient he referred to Dan or Rebecca needs to be notified. And get me everything on his current location." But I was stuck on one thought. How many other women had been profiled, analyzed, and targeted? How many other therapists might be involved in similar schemes? "Jenny?" Grace's voice was gentle. "What do you want to do?" I looked at the video, still paused on my screen. Dan and Rebecca planning my manipulation years before I'd even met them. Then I looked at the files showing other women they'd targeted, other lives they'd planned to destroy. "We burn it all down," I said quietly. "Not just their current operation, everything. Every scheme, every conspiracy, every person who helped them target vulnerable women." Grace nodded, understanding in her eyes. "It won't be easy. People like Carter, they're good at hiding. But they're not good at staying hidden," Michelle added, her eyes still on her screen. "They get confident, sloppy, like these emails Carter sent from his anonymous account. He used the same password pattern for everything. Give me 2 hours." As the sun began to rise over Portland, we had the beginnings of a new plan. This wasn't just about stopping one fraudulent wellness center anymore. This was about exposing an entire network of predators who used trusted professionals to identify and exploit successful women. My phone buzzed again. Rebecca, this time, with a carefully worded invitation to a healing circle at the wellness center. Every word was calculated to appeal to vulnerabilities James had identified years ago in his therapy notes. "Perfect timing," Michelle murmured, reading over my shoulder. "While they're focused on damage control here, we can start unraveling their operation from the outside." Patricia was already coordinating with law enforcement in other cities, building cases around the previous wellness centers. Grace was drafting documents to freeze assets we hadn't even known existed yesterday. The rain had finally stopped, leaving a strange clarity in its wake. Everything looked different now, not just my relationship with Dan, but every interaction I'd had over the past 4 years. How many conversations had been genuine? How many relationships had been real? But as I watched these brilliant women work, each bringing their unique skills to dismantle this conspiracy, I felt something else too. Hope. Not just for justice, but for all the women we might save from falling into their carefully laid traps. "Jenny?" Michelle called softly. "I found something else. A list of their next targets. Women they've been grooming for months. All successful, all vulnerable. All carefully profiled and analyzed." I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. Send it to Patricia. And Michelle? Find me everything you can about James Carter's current location. It's time we had a conversation about patient confidentiality. The morning light filtered through the office windows, casting long shadows across our scattered documents and glowing screens. Somewhere out there, Dan and Rebecca were probably planning their next move, confident in their ability to manipulate and control. They had no idea that their perfect plan, years in the making, was about to collapse. Not just because of what we'd discovered, but because they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that broken trust meant broken spirit. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The atrium of Zen Life Wellness Center glowed with carefully positioned ambient lighting, designed to create an atmosphere of tranquility and trust. Himalayan salt lamps cast a soft pink hue over the reception area where I sat, waiting for my 7 o'clock meeting with Dan and Rebecca. The air was heavy with expensive essential oils, a custom blend that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Through hidden earpieces, I could hear Michelle coordinating our surveillance team. All exits covered. Grace's people are in position. We've got eyes on both targets. Her voice was steady, professional, a sharp contrast to the nervous energy coursing through my veins. Right on cue, Rebecca emerged from the meditation room, wearing flowing white linen that somehow managed to look both spiritual and calculating. Jenny, thank you for coming. I know this hasn't been easy. Her voice carried that practiced, gentle tone that had fooled so many others. Dan appeared moments later from his office, his usual confident swagger slightly dimmed. Honey, you're here. I was starting to worry you wouldn't come. He moved to embrace me, but I stepped back, watching the flash of frustration cross his face. Let's skip the performance, I said quietly. I think we all know why I'm really here. Rebecca's serene mask slipped for just a moment. Whatever. You think you know? How about we start with James Carter? The name hit them like a physical blow. Dan's face went pale, while Rebecca's perfect posture stiffened. Or should we discuss the other wellness centers? Seattle, Vancouver, San Francisco? Those business ventures were completely legitimate, Dan started. But I cut him off. Save it for the prosecutors. I've seen the videos, Dan. The planning sessions where you and Rebecca mapped out exactly how to manipulate me. 4 years of surveillance and profiling before you ever accidentally bumped into me at that wedding. Rebecca moved then, trying to position herself between Dan and me, a practiced maneuver they'd probably used countless times before. Jenny, please. You don't understand what's really happening here. We were trying to build something meaningful. By stealing from successful women? By using their therapist's notes against them? Tell me, Rebecca, how many other lives have you destroyed while building your meaningful projects? Through my earpiece, Michelle's voice came urgently. Movement at the back entrance. 2 more players entering. I didn't need Michelle's warning to sense the shift in the room's energy. The glass doors opened, admitting 2 figures I'd been expecting, James Carter himself, and a woman I recognized from his case files, Elizabeth Morgan, another therapist who'd been feeding them information about potential victims. Well, James said smoothly, his familiar therapeutic tone sending chills down my spine. I see we have some issues to work through. Dr. Carter, I acknowledged, noting how Dan and Rebecca had automatically shifted to flank him. How's Arizona? Oh wait, you never actually moved there, did you? Too busy setting up fake wellness centers and violating patient confidentiality. Elizabeth stepped forward, her professional demeanor as practiced as Rebecca's spiritual one. Jenny, you're clearly experiencing some paranoid delusions. Why don't we all sit down and discuss this rationally? Rationally? I pulled out my phone, playing one of the videos we'd discovered. James's voice filled the atrium. Target profile indicates high achievement orientation combined with underlying abandonment issues. Classic type A personality with exploitable trust patterns. The color drained from Elizabeth's face as her own voice joined his, discussing how to best manipulate their patients' vulnerabilities. Dan moved toward me, his hand outstretched. "Give me the phone, Jenny." "Or what? You'll threaten me like you threatened your sister. How's that working out for you, by the way?" The mention of Laura made Dan's mask crack completely. "You stupid bitch," he snarled. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Do you know how many powerful people are involved in this? How far this goes?" "Actually, I do." I smiled as Grace Chen entered through the main doors, followed by 2 FBI agents. That's why we're not just here about the fraud or the stolen money. This is about systematic exploitation of vulnerable women through compromised mental health professionals. James tried to bolt for the back exit but found his path blocked by more agents. Rebecca's spiritual calm evaporated entirely as she realized they were surrounded. Elizabeth had gone completely still, her therapist's mask frozen in place. "Jennifer Thompson?" One of the agents stepped forward. "We're ready when you are." I looked at the 4 people who had orchestrated so much pain, who had turned therapy sessions and wellness spaces into hunting grounds for vulnerable women. "You know what the funny thing is? You actually taught me something valuable about trust." "And what's that?" Rebecca spat, all pretense of serenity gone. "That when you break it, you never know who people will turn to for help. How many of your other victims do you think we've contacted? How many other women are out there comparing notes right now?" Through my earpiece, Michelle's voice came again. "Sophia's team is in position with the media. Andrea's got the medical board representatives standing by. We're ready." Dan must have seen something change in my expression because he tried one last time to regain control. "Jenny, baby, think about what you're doing. We can work this out. Just you and me like before." "No," I said simply. "Not like before. Not ever again." I turned to the FBI agent. "They're all yours. Every file, every video, every patient record they stole. It's all been transmitted to your office." The next few minutes were a blur of activity. As the agents began their arrests, more people entered the atrium. Journalists Sophia had contacted, medical board investigators, even some of their previous victims from other cities. Each arrest was photographed, each charge read aloud clearly for the rolling cameras. James tried to maintain his professional demeanor even as he was being handcuffed. "Jenny, as your therapist, I really think you're acting out of unresolved trauma. You stopped being my therapist the moment you sold my trust to the highest bidder." I cut him off. "But don't worry, you'll have plenty of time to psychoanalyze yourself in prison." Elizabeth broke down completely, crying about how she was just trying to help people find wellness and balance. Rebecca maintained her spiritual facade until the agents found her go bag hidden in the meditation room, packed with cash and fake passports. But it was Dan's reaction that struck me most. As the agents led him past me, he looked completely bewildered, as if he genuinely couldn't understand how his perfect plan had fallen apart. "I gave you everything," he said. "I made you successful." "No, Dan, I was already successful. You just didn't think I was strong enough to see through your lies. That was your mistake, underestimating every woman you targeted." As they were led away, Grace approached with a thick file. "Ready for phase 2? I nodded, watching as forensic teams began combing through the wellness center. "How many other clinics did you say they were connected to?" 17 across, 5 states. Each one with its own James Carter, its own Elizabeth Morgan. We're coordinating with law enforcement in each jurisdiction now." Michelle's voice came through my earpiece one last time. "Jenny, you should see this. Their encrypted server just tried to auto-delete everything, but we caught it. There are files here going back 10 years, hundreds of victims. I thought about all the women they'd targeted, all the trust they'd broken, all the lives they'd tried to destroy. Send everything to Grace. Every victim deserves to know the truth. As the last police car pulled away, I stood in the atrium of what was supposed to be Dan and Rebecca's crowning achievement. The essential oils still perfumed the air, the salt lamps still cast their soft pink glow, but now it all seemed hollow, a facade as fake as their promises of wellness and healing. My phone buzzed with messages from other victims, women who'd been waiting for this moment, watching the arrests live-streamed by Sophia's media contacts. Each message carried the same theme. Thank you for bringing them down. Thank you for helping us understand we weren't alone. Grace touched my arm gently. The medical board wants to know if you'll testify about James and Elizabeth. I looked around at the space that had been built with stolen money and broken trust. Yes, I said firmly. It's time everyone knew the truth about what happens when trusted professionals abuse their power. Outside, the Portland rain had started again, washing away the last traces of incense and essential oils. Somewhere in police custody, 4 people who had built an empire on exploitation were finally facing consequences. But their arrests weren't the end, they were just the beginning. We had hundreds of victims to contact, years of fraud to unravel, and an entire network of corrupt mental health professionals to expose. But looking at the strong women who had helped make this moment possible, I knew we were ready for whatever came next. They had tried to use our trust against us, tried to turn our vulnerabilities into weapons. Instead, they had created something they never expected: a network of survivors determined to protect others from falling into their traps. The Wellness Center would never open its doors now, but maybe something better would rise from its ashes. Something built on real trust, real healing, and the unshakable strength of women supporting women. That would be the real revenge, turning their instrument of exploitation into a force for genuine change. After all, they had taught us exactly what not to do. Now it was our turn to show the world what real wellness and empowerment looked like. The morning after the arrests, Portland's skyline emerged from a thick fog as I stood in my new apartment in the Pearl District. Moving boxes still lined the walls, but the space already felt more like home than the townhouse ever had. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched the city wake up, knowing that somewhere in the federal detention center, Dan, Rebecca, James, and Elizabeth were facing their first morning behind bars. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Messages from other victims, reporters seeking statements, even a few former clients checking if their personal information had been compromised. Grace had advised me to direct all communication through her office, but one message caught my attention. An email from Dr. Sandra Martinez, head of the State Medical Board's Ethics Committee. The scope of this betrayal extends far beyond Portland. She wrote, "We've uncovered similar patterns in wellness centers across the West Coast. Your testimony could help us implement new safeguards to protect patient confidentiality. Would you be willing to meet?" The scent of fresh coffee drew me to the kitchen, where Kate was already setting up her laptop, surrounded by stacks of documents. Since the arrests, she'd taken a leave of absence from teaching to help coordinate our growing network of survivors. "Morning," she said, sliding a mug toward me. "Ready for today's agenda?" The FBI wants to review the Seattle Wellness Center records, and Andrea's found 3 more therapists connected to James Carter's network. Before I could respond, Michelle's face appeared on Kate's laptop screen. "You both need to see this," she said, sharing her screen. "Rebecca's sister just posted an interesting thread on Twitter." The posts painted a familiar picture: Rebecca as the misunderstood victim, manipulated by Dan, and coerced into participating in his schemes. She claimed Rebecca had been trying to gather evidence to expose the operation from within, that she'd been working with authorities all along. "Classic Darvo," Grace's voice came through the speaker. She must have joined the call while I was reading. "Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. We expected this." "What we didn't expect," Michelle continued, "was this." She pulled up another document, bank records showing substantial transfers from Rebecca's private account to offshore holdings in her sister's name. They were planning their own exit strategy, separate from Dan's. A knock at my door interrupted our discussion. Through the peephole, I saw Sarah Mitchell, our forensic accountant, clutching what looked like new evidence. I let her in quickly. "The wellness center wasn't their endgame," she announced without preamble, spreading papers across my kitchen counter. "It was just phase 1. Look at these property records." We gathered around the documents. Dan and Rebecca had been quietly acquiring land through shell companies, planning to build an entire network of wellness communities, exclusive developments targeting successful women looking for work-life balance. "The real money wasn't in the centers," Sarah explained, pointing to projected revenue streams. "It was in the real estate. They were going to use the wellness center client list to pre-sell units at inflated prices, then vanish before construction ever began." My phone buzzed again. A text from Laura, Dan's sister. "FBI just finished interviewing Mark. You won't believe what they found in Dan's office safe." "I need to go," I told the group, already reaching for my coat. "Grace, can you meet me at the Federal Building?" The drive downtown gave me time to think. Every day brought new revelations, new layers to their deception. But it also brought new connections, new allies in our fight for justice. Women who had been isolated by shame and self-doubt were finding their voices, sharing their stories, helping others recognize the warning signs. At the Federal Building, Laura was waiting with Mark. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady as she explained what they'd found. A detailed playbook for identifying and exploiting successful women, complete with psychological profiles provided by compromised therapists. "There are notes about everyone," she said, hands shaking slightly. "Not just the wellness center victims. Every client Dan ever worked with in real estate, every woman who took Rebecca's yoga classes, they were all being assessed for potential exploitation." Grace arrived as Laura was describing the contents of the safe. "We need to move quickly," she said after hearing Laura's account. "If this playbook is as detailed as you say, it could help us identify other operations before they get started." Back at my apartment, the team had grown. Sophia was coordinating with her media contacts, ensuring the story stayed focused on the systemic nature of the exploitation rather than sensationalizing individual details. Andrea was working with medical board investigators, tracing connections between corrupt therapists and fraudulent wellness centers. "Jenny," Michelle called from the laptop screen, "Patricia's ready with the civil suit documentation whenever you want to review it." I looked around at these women who had become so much more than allies. They were warriors in a battle none of us had expected to fight. Each brought unique skills, perspectives, and determination to our cause. The fog had lifted completely now, revealing a city forever changed by what we'd uncovered. But as I watched my team work, I realized something important. We weren't just exposing corruption. We were building something new from the ashes of betrayal. My door buzzed again. This time it was Dr. Martinez from the medical board, arriving early for our scheduled meeting. Her expression was grave as she set down her briefcase. "We've been going through James Carter's records," she began. "The network is larger than we initially thought. These wellness centers, they were just the visible part of a much bigger operation." She spread out documentation showing how corrupt therapists had been systematically identifying and profiling successful women for years, creating a pipeline of potential victims for various fraud schemes. "They preyed on women during their most vulnerable moments," Dr. Martinez continued, "using therapy sessions to gather intelligence, to identify patterns and weaknesses that could be exploited." My phone lit up with another message, this time from Rebecca's cellmate. She'd reached out through proper channels, claiming she had information about other operations still in progress. Grace advised caution. "It could be another manipulation attempt," she warned. "Rebecca's very good at playing the reformed insider." But something about the message felt different. Perhaps it was the detailed information about wellness centers we hadn't yet uncovered, or the names of therapists who hadn't appeared in any of our files. We need to check it out, I decided. But carefully. Michelle, can you verify these locations? As Michelle began her research, Sarah arrived with more financial records. The property developments weren't just for future fraud, she announced. They were also money laundering operations. Clean cash mixed with dirty money, all hidden behind legitimate-looking real estate transactions. The scope of what we were uncovering was staggering. What had started as one woman's discovery of her husband's betrayal had led to the exposure of a vast network of exploitation targeting successful women across multiple states. Dr. Martinez took careful notes as we shared our findings. This will change everything, she said. Not just how we regulate therapy practices, but how we think about protecting vulnerable clients from systematic exploitation. My phone buzzed yet again. Another victim reaching out. Another story of trust betrayed and strength rediscovered. Each message reinforced what we already knew. We weren't just fighting for justice, we were fighting for transformation. As the day progressed, our team grew more focused, more determined. We weren't just victims anymore. We were investigators, advocates, and change-makers. Each new piece of evidence, each additional connection we uncovered, strengthened our resolve. The sun was setting over Portland when we finally took a break. Looking around my new apartment, at the women who had become my strongest allies, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Hope. Not just for justice, but for real, lasting change. We were building something powerful. From the wreckage of betrayal, a network of support, a system for identifying and stopping exploitation before it could take root. The very things they had used against us, our success, our trust, our desire for connection, were becoming our greatest strengths. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, new battles to fight. But tonight, watching the city lights come alive as darkness fell, I knew we were ready. They had tried to break us, but instead, they had forged us into something unbreakable. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were transforming. And that transformation would ripple out far beyond Portland, touching lives we hadn't even met yet, protecting women who would never know how close they came to being targeted. That would be our true victory, not just exposing the past, but protecting the future. One story, one connection, one changed life at a time. 1 year later, I stood at the podium in the Portland Convention Center, facing a room filled with hundreds of women. The air hummed with energy as I prepared to deliver the keynote speech at the first National Conference on Financial Exploitation Prevention. Behind me, a banner read, "Breaking the Silence, From Victims to Victors." A year ago, I thought I was alone, I began, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at fraudulent credit, card charges, thinking I was the only one who had been betrayed this way. I had no idea that moment would lead to exposing one of the largest organized fraud networks targeting successful women in the country. The faces looking back at me weren't just conference attendees. They were survivors, advocates, and warriors in their own right. Many had similar stories, different only in the details. In the front row sat our core team: Kate, Michelle, Grace, Sarah, and Andrea. Sophia was live streaming the event through her now national media network. Today, I'm not here to talk about Dan Thompson, Rebecca Anderson, or the therapists who betrayed their patients' trust. They're serving their sentences, their stories old news. I'm here to talk about what we built from the ashes of their deception. The screens behind me displayed statistics that still had the power to take my breath away. Over the past year, our network had helped expose 47 similar operations across the country. 312 corrupt mental health professionals had lost their licenses. Thousands of women had come forward with their own stories of targeted exploitation. But the numbers don't tell the real story, I continued. The real story is about connection, about women refusing to remain silent, about turning personal pain into collective power. Dr. Sandra Martinez stepped up beside me, ready to announce the new national guidelines for patient confidentiality and fraud prevention that had grown from our case. The protocols, now known as the Thompson Regulations, were being adopted by medical boards across the country. When we started this journey, we thought we were fighting individual criminals, I told the crowd. What we discovered was an entire system designed to exploit women's success and trust. But systems can be changed. Networks of exploitation can be transformed into networks of protection. The evidence we'd gathered had led to more than just criminal convictions. It had sparked a movement. The Wellness Center fraud had become a case study in law schools, psychology programs, and business ethics courses. Women were learning to recognize the warning signs, to trust their instincts, to reach out for help before it was too late. Laura Thompson, no longer using Dan's last name, took the stage next. She'd become one of our strongest advocates, turning her insider knowledge of how predators operated into valuable intelligence for law enforcement. Her testimony had been crucial in exposing similar operations in other cities. The hardest lesson we learned, she shared, was that silence serves the predators. Every woman who speaks up makes it harder for them to operate, harder for them to isolate their next target. The former Zen Life building had been transformed into the Women's Financial Empowerment Center, offering legitimate wellness services alongside financial literacy programs and fraud prevention workshops. The same space that had been designed to exploit now served as a beacon of hope and education. Rebecca's sister had eventually turned state's evidence, revealing connections to operations we hadn't even known existed. Her cooperation had helped us understand how these schemes evolved, how they identified and groomed potential victims, how they created the perfect mix of trust and isolation. As I looked out at the audience, I saw more than just survivors. I saw CEOs who had implemented new financial security protocols in their companies, therapists who had helped design early warning systems for patient exploitation, lawyers who had specialized in helping women recover from financial fraud. The greatest weapon they had, I continued, was our belief that we were alone, that no one would understand how we, successful professional women, could fall victim to such schemes. That shame kept us silent, kept us isolated, kept us perfect targets. Michelle's tech team had developed software specifically designed to detect patterns of systematic financial exploitation. The program, now used by banks across the country, had already prevented millions in potential fraud. But we're not alone anymore, I said, my voice growing stronger. Every woman in this room represents hundreds more who are finding their voice, sharing their story, protecting others from experiencing what we went through. Sarah stepped forward to present the latest findings from our financial forensics team. The patterns we'd identified had led to the creation of new banking regulations specifically designed to protect against targeted exploitation of successful women. They thought they could use our success against us, I told the crowd. They studied our habits, our schedules, our tendencies to trust. But they didn't understand something fundamental about successful women. We don't just learn from our victories. We learn from our setbacks, and we come back stronger. The conference wasn't just about sharing stories or presenting findings. It was about building something new. Every session, every workshop, every networking event was designed to strengthen the connections between women to make it harder for predators to isolate and exploit their targets. Grace Chen took the podium next, outlining the legal precedents our case had established. Courts across the country were now recognizing the systematic nature of these crimes, treating them as organized fraud rather than individual incidents of theft. A year ago, we thought we were fighting for justice, I concluded. What we discovered was that we were fighting for transformation. Every woman who speaks up, every story that's shared, every connection that's made, they're all part of building something bigger than ourselves. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for me or our team. It was for every woman in that room who had refused to let shame silence her, who had turned her pain into purpose, who had reached out to help others even as she was healing herself. After the speech, women lined up to share their stories, to connect, to join our growing network. Each one represented a link in a chain of protection and support that stretched across the country. Later that evening, as we gathered for a quieter celebration in my Pearl District apartment, I looked around at the women who had become my closest allies. Kate, who had never doubted my instincts. Michelle, whose technical brilliance had helped expose the truth. Grace, who had turned our evidence into justice. Sarah, who had followed every financial thread. Andrea, who had helped heal the deeper wounds of betrayal. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Another wellness center fraud had been stopped before. It could begin, thanks to the early warning systems we'd helped put in place. Another group of women protected, another predatory scheme disrupted before it could take root. The Portland lights twinkled beyond my windows, but they weren't the same lights I'd stared at in despair a year ago. The city had changed, or maybe I had. Where I once saw shadows of betrayal, I now saw networks of protection. Where I once felt isolated, I now felt connected to something larger than myself. To transformation, Kate proposed, raising her glass, and to the women who refused to stay silent. We toasted, knowing that our work wasn't finished. There would always be those who sought to exploit trust, to prey on success, to turn strength into vulnerability. But they would find it harder now. The silence was broken, the shame dispelled, the isolation ended. As the evening wound down, I stepped out onto my balcony, breathing in the crisp Portland air. Somewhere in a federal prison, Dan was serving his sentence, his perfect scheme in ruins. Rebecca was in a different facility, her wellness empire exposed as a fraud. James Carter and Elizabeth Morgan had lost their licenses and their freedom, their betrayal of patient trust now a cautionary tale taught in ethics classes. But their fate wasn't what mattered anymore. What mattered was what we had built from the wreckage of their deception. A network of support that spanned the country. A system of protection that grew stronger every day. A movement that turned victims into advocates. Silence into strength. Isolation into connection. My phone buzzed one last time. Another woman. Reaching out, another story waiting to be told. Another link being added to our chain of support. I smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new opportunities to transform pain into power. They had tried to use our success against us, tried to turn our trust into a weapon. Instead, they had helped create something they never expected. An army of women who refused to be silenced, who turned their experience into armor for others, who transformed their healing into protection for those who might have been next. That was the real victory, not just exposing the truth, but building something new from it, something stronger, something unbreakable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.